Hi, I'm Jodi Miner.
And I'm Ian Brown.
And we're here to talk a little bit about wader repair and care. We've been fishing together for over 25 years. I learned from him.
I learned from my father and from fellow members of the Calgary Hook and Hackle Club many years ago during my teenage years.
And we are both fly fishing instructors with PA Fish and Boat and members of Penwood's West Trout Unlimited out here in Pittsburgh. So when you first get into fishing, you're probably going to be looking at waders, and there are several different types of waders that you could potentially purchase. What we're going to show you today will work with every type of wader, but let's just talk briefly about those different types of waders. So first and foremost, there are the old-fashioned neoprene waders. Those are warm. They actually have a little padding for when you fall down a bank unexpectedly, and they're very durable. The only problem with them is they're not breathable, so you may not want to use them in the summer, but if you have a pair, the techniques we're going to show you today on our breathable waders will work just fine. Then there are the breathable waders, and you can buy breathable waders in any price range. I'm going to tell you that the primary difference between a cheap breathable and an expensive breathable is probably the price and some of the bells and whistles that come with it. So if you're a beginning fly fisher person or you don't have a lot of money, go ahead and buy an inexpensive pair of waders, and I'll tell you later in another video, you want to spend your money on your boots because your boots could quite literally save your life. I'd like to talk a little bit about the difference between a boot foot wader and a stocking foot wader. A boot foot wader has a boot integrated into the wader. Stocking feet waders, you have to buy a boot with those waders. I always prefer the stocking foot waders because honestly, I go through more waders than I do boots. But if you have boot foot waders, what we're going to show you here today will work just fine. So one of the things that's important about daily wader care is that every time you come back from the stream, there are certain things you can do to prevent your waders from becoming more damaged and also to preserve them for many, many years. One of the first and simplest things you can do is hang them to dry. So I'm here in my garage, and we hang our waders here in the garage when we come back from any fishing trip. You want to hang them instead of leaving them in your car, because if you leave them in your car, they could get overheated, they could crack, and if you're like me, you roll them up and put them in a corner and they're going to get damaged. The other thing you want to do when you actually bring them home and let them dry is you want to inspect them a little bit. You're looking for dirt, you're looking for grime, you're also looking for any obvious holes or problems. So one of the things I always look at every time we bring our waders home is I want to look under the gravel guards to make sure that I don't bring anything else home with me. And I also want to check all of the various seams and the various seam linings just to see if there's a spot where it maybe has pulled a little bit loose, because as we're going to cover, there are ways that you can repair them, but first you have to know there's a problem. One of the other things that's important, and the reason that I always hang my waders and let them dry, is because here in Pennsylvania we do have several invasive species. And to learn more about those, you can go to the Fish and Boat website, and they have specific instructions on what you should do with your waders in order to disinfect them. But one of the very simplest things you can do, because these are aquatic species, is let them dry. If in fact you're out somewhere and you don't have that opportunity, then please look at Fish and Boat's website and see what you should do, or carry a second pair of waders if you're going to another stream where those species don't exist. So you've brought your waders home, you've hung them up, and you know that you just crawled through some briars or you climbed up a rocky bank and you're concerned about what damage you may have done. Let's look at some of the common areas where you're going to actually see damage. So I have my waders here, and I've actually turned one of the legs inside out so I can show you a little bit of what I would look for. The first thing I would look for, honestly, is I would turn back my gravel guard and just look to see if there's anything caught under it, or if there's any place where I begin to see a little hole. The other place that you're often going to get holes are in the feet, especially the heels and where the foot actually attaches to the leg. Because you've got a seam there, you're walking, you're pulling it, you're probably pulling them on and off. So take a good look and see if there's any spots where these seams have actually started to split, where something's starting to come a little loose, or where occasionally I find a divot where I got a rock inside my boot. Once you've done that on the outside, also look for anything that might have gone on with your knees, because obviously you spend a lot of time on your knees. For example, I can see a little tiny spot here where some of the seam has come loose. There's some other little spots where I'm looking for anything that I want to make sure I cover and make sure that it doesn't leak. I then want to turn my waders inside out, and I'm looking for exactly the same thing on the inside. These waders have a 4-way patch here that was put in when they were manufactured to reinforce them. But along here I can see this is starting to come undone a little bit. So I would want to seal that up before it becomes bad enough that I would actually have a major leak. I'm also going to look at the feet, see if there's anything going on with them that maybe has a little bit of a leak. And I'm also looking, frankly, for any place where maybe I've got a rough spot, like right in here, which could rub and cause me some pain. I'm going to repair all of that before I go out the next time on any major fishing event.
Okay, so when you get a new pair of waders, generally speaking, you will get a patch with the waders, or a patch kit. It usually has a small piece of material similar to the waders that you have. It may also have a little package of Aquaseal in it. And this is great stuff. Hopefully you'll never actually have to use this. To date, I never have, thankfully. So I've been reliant on on-stream repair and more often repairs at home. If I'm out wading and I notice a wet spot, what I try to do is figure out exactly where that wet spot is when I take my waders off. And because I have really, really short vision, I can actually get down really close to the waders and look for abrasions or actual pinholes, and I'm pretty good at spotting them. If, however, you're needing to find a pinhole, it may have to wait till you get home. And there's a couple of tricks you can use to find it. This pair of waders has a couple of pinholes in it. I know because I put them in a place where I won't get wet. When you get home, if you get yourself some isopropyl alcohol, or rubbing alcohol, and put it in a little spritzer, you can actually spray it on the back of the waders where you suspect the hole is. And then keep an eye open, and you will start to see the pinhole appear as a darker spot on the wader. And there's actually two. There's one here, and there's one here. So those can be now fixed at home. Had I found them on the stream, I could use this UV wader repair. It's a very useful emergency repair kit in a tube, if you will. It's an ultraviolet light activated resin, basically. We use it for fly tying as well. And all we have to do is take it, find one of the holes, and essentially just smear it over that hole, squeeze it out, give it a good smear over the hole, in the shade ideally, and then expose it to sunlight, and it will cure very, very quickly. Since I'm indoors, I have artificial sunlight, a UV light here, and I'm just going to cure this for a few seconds, just as if it were outside. And when it's done, it's now cured, it won't smear, and that little hole is now patched. That won't leak anymore for me. If it were a little bigger hole, I might decide to use Aquaseal instead. Okay, now we're going to take a look at a slightly different patch. I have an old pair of waders here. I still use it. And I patched a bit of a seam in here a number of years ago, and it has basically started to chip away on me. So I've gone in and removed the worst of it. I'm just going to patch again with a little bit of Aquaseal. I'm going to take a piece of plastic, in this case a plastic bag. You could use newspaper or whatever. I'm just going to stuff it in here so I have a little more to work with down where that repair is required, so I can actually brace it up. And you'll see there's a bit of a seam that gave in here. It's really nothing too serious. It was never a bad leak. For this, I'm going to use Aquaseal. Aquaseal is dead easy to use. The disadvantage of Aquaseal is that it takes 12 to 24 hours to cure properly, so it's not something you can do the stream side. I'm simply going to smear the Aquaseal in, squeeze it out a bit so I can actually get a little more in there. I want a fairly robust repair here. And I'm just going to squeeze this in, work it on. really just using the tip of the Aquaseal tube here to smear things around. And since this was a fairly bad one earlier, I'm going to add a little more, just not worry about a little extra coverage here. Hopefully this will get me a few years of additional use. Though, as my wife will tell you, I go through waders very, very rapidly because I abuse them rather seriously. There we go. Basically, what I'm going to do now is just let this thing seal up, and eventually it will cure overnight, and we'll be ready to go. Now, if I had had a patch that needed say I'd run into a barbed wire fence and had a more serious puncture somewhere down on my shin, what I would do is something very similar. I would take the permanent sort of replacement fabric. It's only one layer, whereas your wader typically has 3 to 5 layers in the knee. But I would take the Aquaseal and I'd smear a good blob roughly where the cut or slash is. I'd let it start to get tacky. I'd snip off a piece of this that was big enough to cover the hole. And once the Aquaseal was a little tacky, maybe give it 30 minutes or so, I'd press that onto the Aquaseal. And then after it dried, 12 to 24 hours, being me, I would probably go around and I'd seal the edges even further with more Aquaseal. As I say, fortunately, I've never had to use a big patch. All I've ever had to do is put in small puncture repairs.
I want to thank you for watching this short video. We hope that some of the tips and tricks we provided will be helpful to you. And we also hope to see you out on the stream one day soon. In the meantime, please remember every time you fish to pick up a piece of trash, because we all live downstream. Thanks and happy fishing.